I seem to have a soft spot for things that are just about as universal as possible. And I gotta say, belief is definitely up there because if you look at it in terms of human beings having these sort of concentric circles that extend out from the core, let's say, belief is definitely the second or third. And it's a sacred place. It's a place that in our adolescence, it's easy to believe things. And as we age and get more mature and experience things in life, it should, ideally, become more difficult to get somebody to believe something. Like when we're children. And I remember, like I've said, what it's like to be a kid. I remember what it's like behind the eyes of a child. And I believe things just so easily. I mean, most things went in one ear and out the other, but the things that did stick, I believed instantly because I spent most of my time, obviously, with my parents and my family. And I trusted my parents, so when my parents said something, I believed it. Santa is sort of the universal example, and when I think in retrospect, it's kind of a good thing that I learned to believe something that I later found out was not at all the truth, because it shows that you can believe something through and through, and that thing can be changed so much so to the point of obliteration. And yeah, when you're a kid, you're told, that there's Santa, there's this dude out there who does this stuff, and it's great. And one day, maybe you're in school or you're talking to a friend or something, and one of them says, Santa's not real. And at first you're like, whoa, 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 what? And there's a little bit of an initial resistance because at that age, you have Christmases over and over again, the presents keep showing up, and this thing is a couple years old at this point. But as it's explained, somebody will say maybe, well, he's not real. I mean, do you have a chimney? And you're like, no. Have you seen Santa? No. Do you really think that there is a guy who knows everything good and bad that you've done the entire year, who has magical reindeer and a magical sled, and he manages in one night to deliver all the gifts for all the children of all the world? Well, when you put it that way, it's hard to refute. But maybe at that point, you still don't not believe. So you go to somebody else. Did you know Santa's not real? Yeah, of course. And at this point, it's kind of like, okay. And the belief is safe to change. But that's kind of an easy one. And I remember my first thought wasn't my parents lied. It was just, that was that. It was incorporated, and I moved right along. But as you age, adolescence is a time. Belief is a sacred thing. It's a sacred place. And as you age, it should be increasingly difficult to get you to believe something. Hypothetically, think about it. That's what naivety is. That's what innocence is. It is believing almost instantaneously when you hear something. And we would call somebody naive who believed things instantly. And I think we all pretty well understand that, but as time goes, it becomes, life throws at you ever increasing complex things that will test all that you are. it will test this thing that I have, that everybody has, I think. That's this kind of nebulous zone where information goes. And I think, for me, it's a huge portion of my intellectual abilities. It's this nebulous zone where information goes that doesn't result in me believing something, and it doesn't result in me not believing something. It remains there as incomplete information, awaiting more information that either confirms or denies any cluster of information that I have. So, let's say at first you just hear something. And yes, you hear it, there it is, okay. But it doesn't go to the level of belief. Not at a certain point in your life. Now, this is going to depend on who you're hearing it from and how they say it. Do you trust this person? Do they have a history of saying things that have turned out to be true? If the answer is yes, then that sort of increases the likelihood that it's safe to believe. If we walked around this world believing everything that we heard, this would be a very different place. And so you hear it for the first time from a trusted source, and you don't believe it, and you don't not believe it. You sort of accept it as information that exists. And let's say at this point it's 7% complete. And then the days go, time goes, and you hear something else that is complementary to what you heard before. And now maybe it's 15% complete. Maybe it's a small piece. Maybe it's a visual. Maybe it's a thorough explanation with a video. And that just moves it all the way up, far beyond 15%. But let's say the video is faked, the information's faked, all that stuff is faked. Then it takes all that information back, and you're back to 7. Maybe even less than 7, because you now see that there is, for whatever reason, people falsifying information about this thing. And now that's causing a whole other belief to form about that particular thing. And that's how it goes. There is this giant space of information that remains yet incomplete, that awaits and more information that either confirms, denies, adds to it, detracts from it. And there's all kinds of things that are like that. There are some things that are 98% complete, just awaiting that last little bit of information that knocks it all the way home. There are some things that are half complete, 40%, 50%, 60, 70%. And they're like clusters of like or related information. You can almost think of them as cell clusters or atomic clusters. But once something is believed, this is why it's so sacred. Once something is believed, once information or a thing or whatever is in you to that degree, it's going to influence how you act and behave on a day-to-day basis. It's going to influence how you perceive the world and people. So, yes, that's why it's so sacred. And it's weird. When we're kids, it's like it's such a quick and extreme atmosphere for belief. It's it's like I said, it's either it goes in one ear and out the other, and it just doesn't stick for whatever reason. And for some other reason, things do stick. And it totally depends on who you are, and it totally depends on the information you're hearing. But it's right there, right up against the core of us. Belief is somewhere next to the very structure, the very basics, the very elements of your personality as a human being, and the self, the universal self, the thing that we all share that never changes, the spot where all things pass through and nothing sticks, the ultimate observer. And belief becomes this huge block of permanently influx knowing that directly influences our behavior and what we say on a day-to-day basis. And if you're somebody who does not believe in love at all, even if you see love in a way that's external, you're still going to be skeptical. Because love is like tasting steak. I always go back to tasting steak. It's like seeing the sun. You don't really know it unless you have it. And so many things exist in a theoretical state. And sometimes it's easy to mistake things that are thoroughly theoretical for things that are worthy of belief. Because if something is 98% complete for you, it's still theoretical. And even more, like I said, as with the Santa example, a belief can be obliterated. Because as you age and it gets more and more difficult for you to believe something, obviously, the information that comprises those beliefs goes through an ever more strenuous and rigorous screening process. And that screening process is a mark of your very intelligence. And if it's getting by those things over time, it's very difficult to later say, I wasn't smart enough to catch that. So, as you age, it's more difficult to believe in things, but it's also more difficult to not believe something you already believe. And that's when things get a little sticky. When, even more so, when you've believed things that have caused you to say and do things that you just can't take back. What are you going to do then? That's why belief is sacred, because it's going to cause you to do things and say things that you cannot take back. And when it comes time to change that belief, you're going to have to do some psychological and mental gymnastics to uphold it, so you don't have to take those things back. Especially if you've done some things. It's one thing to say some things, and it's another to do them. And we have to believe some pretty amazing things to do some of the things that we do. And for me, when it comes to love, the reason I believed in love before I ever felt it was because I saw it, and what I saw was enough for me. Because the love that I saw still exists today. The love that I saw in my childhood, it's still there today, alive and well. So even if I never experienced love myself, I would still have enough to know, at least believe, take that last little leap, even though it's, maybe 95%, because I haven't experienced it myself. There's enough to fill that last little 5% with faith. But once I kind of got a taste of it, well, there's no going back on that. Love absolutely exists. And it is one of those things that you, especially for some who haven't had the exact experiences that I've had where they haven't seen it themselves. So all that there is to experience it, especially if it's gone the other way. So it might make one believe that there is no love. And then suddenly when love arrives, there is now something that you have to stop believing before you believe. And in a situation of love, it's like, it's going to make you do that, especially if it's true, if it's real. And the thing is, too, there is always somebody somewhere who wants us to believe something. Somebody who's trying to get us to believe something. Because, especially this day and age, man, it's like we have so much access to each other. It's like the way political movements go now, the way things go, it almost seems too easy to get people to believe things. If you'll recall, with the advent of radio and TV, simultaneously you saw the explosion of new mass ideological structures being cast and implemented in very strong and complex societies like Germany and Russia. Everywhere, really. And it seemed to be easier and easier to distribute the persuasive material to instill belief in people. And it's like I said, you get one person to say it, that's one thing. If you get another person to say it, that's another thing. But if you get 3 and 4 and 5 who are not only saying the statement, but who have persuasive words to go with it, and who not only have persuasive words, but they're taking these actions to go with it, well, then you're in quite a bind, even if what you're hearing and seeing doesn't seem to be just. It doesn't seem to be healthy. It doesn't feel healthy. But there's a bunch of people doing it and saying it who clearly seem to believe. People who maybe you've known to be intelligent. People maybe you've trusted in the past. And it's going to take a resilient intellect or mind to think to themselves, maybe they're all wrong. What if they're all wrong? What if somehow somebody got to them, somehow they bit? What's going on with that? And that question's been asked many times, like if you were in Nazi Germany when all that was going on, would you have been one of the people who were like, nah, nope, fuck that, this guy's a little crazy? Or would you have gone with it hook, line, and sinker? And think about it now. There's even more potent tools for spreading and speaking and persuading. And man, you really gotta you gotta stay frosty, because I see quite often people saying things and doing things armed only with things that are theoretical, that don't seem to deserve to exist on the level of belief just yet. Things that have even sometimes just come out, have just been said for the first time, and haven't had a tried and true test of day after day after day of back and forth, of true test up against reality to even come close to the level of belief. And it's like, belief, more than anything, is going to influence how we experience the world on a day-to-day basis. It's going to be the thing that makes us draw sweeping conclusions and classify things as they come. This is why I'm the sort of person who reserves things quite well, even if it's from a pretty trustworthy source. It still doesn't go all the way to the level of belief, even if it's somebody I voted for saying something, or somebody who's had a pretty solid track record. It still doesn't quite get to that level. It's still going to exist in that sort of zone where I just need more, because it costs you to act, and it costs you to say and speak, like, especially if you are taking time and putting thought into these things. And the things we believe end up shaping our very personalities, the deeper level, because what we believe is going to end up putting us in certain situations that have the potential to change us in these kind of downstream ways that it's hard to foresee. But I don't know, I feel like for the last maybe, let's say 10 or 15 years, the United States and a lot of the world has slipped into this kind of intellectual dark age. And I can't help but think that great psychological experiments were run, and I can't help but see so many people that were just willing test subjects. That's what it looks like to me. I can't help but think that. I mean, when we have a clear look at what happened when the internet and these apps and stuff really started to become more common and used more often in a day-to-day way, the things that people started to believe definitely did not qualify or deserve to be beliefs. They were highly theoretical. That they weren't even close to being complete clusters. Highly, highly theoretical. Under 20% in terms of completion. And I would be ashamed if I believed those things. I would be ashamed. It would almost feel like an intellectual crime to have bought some of the stuff that I've seen and heard that did not deserve your belief, and it didn't deserve for you to speak on behalf of, and it didn't deserve for you to act on behalf of. Some people are physically changed for the rest of their lives because of some of this stuff. Some people will suffer for the rest of their lives because of some of this stuff. And to date, there is nobody who has been brought to light and been made to ask or answer some questions about some of this stuff. And it's even more, let's say, angering when it deals with children. Because it's one thing to persuade adults of things, okay? That's one thing. But, as I said, when you're young, you believe things way, way more easily. And things sink into the level of belief much more easily and much more quickly. And if you're trying to sell adolescents on things that will change them for the rest of their lives in an irreversible way, then I have some serious questions for you and your motives. And if I was ever in a position of power, that's what I would want to know first and foremost, because if that's what you're doing, then what else are you doing? I mean, my question is, are you stupid or evil? What do you really believe that has caused you to say what you've said and done what you've done? Because, like I said, there's people in our lives who we trust and respect, who say things who we are more likely to believe, but what if it's a doctor? You know? They're sort of like these little universal nodes of trust. And when they say something, we're likely to just, go with it. And act on theoretical information as though it's believable, worthy of belief. And you might just be able to chalk it up to, well, it was a bit of an intellectual dark age and people got swept up in it. And, the initial shock of the internet and social media apps and this stuff, that's what that looked like. Because, of course, now you have a situation where people who normally would not be participating at a high level in the conversations capable of forming belief on a large scale are now able to do that. And this is going to sound crazy, but psychological ailments can spread through words. Psychological ailments can spread through words. Especially some more than others. Especially if you consider delusions psychological ailments. I guess the question would be to what degree or how potent of a delusion are we talking about here? Because we all kind of have those a little bit. You kind of have to have delusions to really get anything done in a way. I guess forecasting the future is kind of a delusion, but it's an educated delusion if you're doing it right. But entire states of mind can be spread and transmitted in these waves through everybody who has a phone. And the variables that make up somebody who's capable of spreading something like that is hard to say exactly. Because the dramatics of a person in tears, a person telling you maybe this thing that happened to them and how they feel about it, it's going to draw you in. It's more likely to make you believe if there is this sort of dramatic component, because this dramatic component is often costing this person something. So you might call them brave. That seems to be the word that people use, is "you're so brave." Because what you're doing here, this dramatic component that's being, I don't want to say used, but this dramatic component that is running parallel with what you're saying is costing you. But in the end, you will benefit. And this is just a very widespread thing, and it's shaped a lot of psychological ailments that have kind of spread through. And honestly, dude, as a sort of person who's just sort of like this observer, whose role really it is to observe and tell you what I see, it's fascinating. I mean, it's fascinating because what used to be a situation where you had groups of people influencing each other locally in a small way, where one person had the ability to influence huge amounts of people just by their presence, based off of characteristics that are, like I said, hard to pinpoint. It can now spread through millions, hundreds of millions of people. And now you can get to a point to where not just 1, 2, or 3 or 4 people are saying something, but millions of people are saying something. And they're acting on behalf of it. They're acting as if they believe it. But as evidenced by what happened in Germany and Japan even, and other places, even with more primitive means of transmission, you can get people to believe, like truly believe, things that are absolutely 100% not true. Especially if you prolong adolescence. The weakness of adolescence is naivety, innocence. And when you get older, innocence is kind of a strength, I guess. If you can hold on to your innocence as well as become cunning, let's say, become sharp and intelligent and wise. Part of wisdom is retaining your innocence, but the weakness of true adolescence, a child, is the inability to discern what is worthy of belief and what isn't. Who is worthy of belief and what isn't. And that's what people prey on. And if adolescence is prolonged, you got a problem, man. Because if all of the components of adolescence are prolonged and maintained psychologically, emotionally, in a group of people, then what you always have is an army. An army who will say and do things on your behalf. And that quote from Jesus really comes into play. They know not what they do. A group of people locked in a state of almost permanent adolescence or prolonged adolescence will say and do things as though they believe them that are against their own interests, that remain theoretical. And sometimes these people, the sort of person, will see something, hear something that completely shatters former beliefs, and just move right along to the next thing, just as easily believing it. And it's going to be one of the ultimate works of my life in discovering how that works. Exactly how that works. And why. Because if you look back through history, prolonged adolescence was a less than common occurrence. And I do think it has something to do with the, let's say, abundance of the society you live in. Prolonged adolescence is a luxury that has serious consequences when you live in a place where you also choose your leaders. Those things, they don't mix well. So, if one does prolong their adolescence, they should also greatly sharpen their cunning. Because these things need balance. And we should, I think, far more often realize that there is a place outside of belief that things can be stored that keep them theoretical and keep them from being things that truly shape how we behave and think and speak on a day-to-day basis. Because when something has theoretical for me, I can't sell it. I can only sell it truly if I believe it. If I don't yet believe it, I can tell you and recite the information about it. And I can tell you about it, but the way I talk about it, you'll know that I don't believe it. You'll hear my caveats. You'll hear me say things that are contrary to it as well. I'll tell you about this thing that's compelling, and I'll tell you about that completely opposing thing that's compelling. And that is part of being an interesting human being.